I still remember the exact moment. The kitchen drawer, the one where we kept all the forks and spoons, it was hanging off its track. I'd been planning to fix it properly that weekend, because it was one of those things that needed the right parts from the hardware store. But Chloe couldn't wait. She called me at work, absolutely frantic, saying she needed a fork and couldn't get into the drawer. This was exactly the kind of thing I always let slide until it became a crisis, which was incredibly rich coming from someone who hadn't fixed a single thing in our house in the entire time we'd lived there. "Can you just come home and fix this?" she demanded, her voice tight. I explained, very calmly, that I was in the middle of a client presentation and absolutely couldn't leave, but I'd handle it that evening when I got back. "I need a fork right now, Mason," she pressed, her voice getting that sharp, familiar edge it always got when she wasn't getting her way. "So, open the drawer manually, or use a spoon, or literally just grab a fork from the dishwasher," I replied, trying not to lose my patience with people staring at me from across the conference table. That's when she hit me with it. The phrase that would become the soundtrack to our marriage's death rattle. Her voice dripped with contempt as she said, "I'm not asking you to be my handyman. I'm asking for basic help. But I guess I forgot. I'm not your mom, so it's not my job to take care of you." I actually laughed out loud. I couldn't help it, the irony was so thick you could cut it with one of the forks she apparently couldn't access. "You're right," I said, probably louder than I should have in a professional setting. "You're not my mom." Which is great, because my mom actually helped my dad and didn't spend all day complaining about how hard it was to exist in a house someone else paid for. I hung up, finished my presentation somehow, and drove home that evening knowing something had fundamentally broken, something we probably couldn't fix. But how did we even get here? How did we get to a point where a broken drawer and a fork could unravel a decade? It's not like it happened overnight. This whole thing started falling apart so slowly that I didn't even notice it was happening. Kind of like how you don't realize you're gaining weight until none of your pants fit anymore. Except instead of pants, it was my entire marriage that stopped fitting. Chloe and I met in college. One of those chemistry study group situations that turned into late-night diner runs, and eventually, into something real. For years, everything felt balanced and good, like we were actually building something together. We got married young, maybe too young according to her mom, who made sure to mention it at every holiday dinner. We had Ethan when I was 26 and Chloe was 25. And then Lily came along 3 years later, when we'd finally figured out how to keep one tiny human alive. The plan was always that Chloe would stay home with the kids. Not because I demanded it, or because I'm some 1950s throwback, but because she specifically said she wanted to be there for their early years, didn't want to miss the important moments. And I supported that decision completely because I thought we were on the same team. I worked in project management for a tech company. Nothing glamorous, but it paid well enough that we could live on one income if we were careful. And Chloe seemed happy with the arrangement for the first few years. Or at least, she never complained about it directly to my face. But somewhere around the time Lily turned 2, something shifted in Chloe. It was like someone had flipped a switch in her brain that changed her from an engaged partner to a completely checked-out roommate, who occasionally reminded me she'd given birth twice. She started sleeping until 9 or 10 in the morning, even though both kids were up at 6:30, which meant I was getting them dressed and fed and out the door to school and daycare before I even started my own workday. And when I'd come home at 6 p.m., the house would look like a tornado had hit it. Toys everywhere, dishes piled in the sink from breakfast that I'd cleaned up the night before, laundry overflowing from the hamper, and Chloe would be on the couch, scrolling through her phone or watching some Netflix show about people with more dramatic problems than ours. I'm not exaggerating when I say I was doing everything. And I mean everything, because I kept a mental list just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. I'd get up at 5:30, go for a quick run because that was the only 30 minutes of the day that belonged to me. Shower, wake up the kids, make breakfast for everyone, including Chloe, who'd stumble out of bed right as we were leaving. Drop Ethan at school and Lily at daycare. Work a full 9-hour day. Pick up both kids. Come home and make dinner while helping Ethan with homework. do bath time and bedtime routines, clean the kitchen, prep tomorrow's lunches, and maybe, if I was lucky, I'd get to sit down at 9 p.m. for an hour before passing out. Chloe's contribution during this time was usually commenting on how tired she was, how hard it was being home with the kids all day, even though they were literally in school and daycare for 6 hours, and how I just didn't understand the mental load of running a household. The mental load thing became her favorite excuse. She'd read some article about emotional labor, and suddenly every request I made was me adding to her invisible burden, even though the actual visible labor was all landing on my shoulders. I tried talking to her about it maybe a dozen times. Gentle conversations where I'd say something like, "Hey, I'm feeling pretty overwhelmed and I could really use some help with the daily stuff." And she'd respond with lectures about how invalidating it was that I didn't recognize all the things she did that I couldn't see. What things? I wanted to scream. What exactly are you doing that's so invisible? Because I can see pretty clearly that you're not doing the laundry or the dishes or the cooking or the cleaning or the child rearing. But I never actually screamed because I was trying to be the reasonable one. So, that night, after the drawer incident, the drawer was still hanging off the track when I got home. Chloe was locked in our bedroom, and both kids were sitting in front of the TV watching YouTube videos that were definitely not age-appropriate because nobody had bothered to supervise them. I did a quick temporary fix with duct tape just to make it functional. Made dinner, did the whole evening routine by myself while Chloe stayed in the bedroom doing God knows what. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, thinking about how I'd become the only parent in a two-parent household. That's when it hit me, really hit me, that I wasn't in a partnership at all. I was running a full-service life support system for someone who decided she was entitled to my labor, but not responsible for any of her own. And the worst part was, she convinced herself she was the victim in all of this. I fell asleep that night with one thought running through my head on repeat, like a mantra I couldn't shake, what happens if I just stop doing everything and let the consequences land where they're supposed to. The next morning, I woke up and made a decision that probably should have come years earlier, which was that I was done being the only adult in this house who gave a damn about keeping our lives from falling apart. I didn't announce it, didn't sit Chloe down for some dramatic conversation about how things were going to change. I just quietly stopped doing all the extra stuff that had somehow become my responsibility, even though we were supposed to be equal partners. No more fixing things the second they broke. No more jumping in to solve problems Chloe created through her own negligence. No more pretending that her complete disengagement from our family life was somehow normal or acceptable. The first test came maybe 3 days later. Chloe came into my home office where I was finishing up some emails before dinner, holding that same kitchen drawer that my duct tape fix had apparently given up on. She announced that the thing was broken again, like she was reporting a natural disaster. And I could see she expected me to drop everything and handle it immediately, the way I always had before. I looked up from my laptop, looked at the drawer, looked back at her face, and said very calmly that it was unfortunate. In that tone you use when someone tells you information that doesn't require your action. She stood there for a solid 10 seconds, clearly waiting for me to elaborate or offer to fix it. And when I just went back to typing, she actually huffed out loud like a teenager who had been told no. She demanded to know if I was going to fix it, her voice getting shrill in that way that used to make me cave immediately because I hated conflict. I replied with a simple no, without even looking up, my fingers still moving across the keyboard like this was the most normal conversation in the world. She practically shouted, asking why not, and I could feel her getting more agitated by the second because this wasn't following the script we'd been acting out for years. I stopped typing, leaned back in my chair, looked her dead in the eye, and said, "Because I'm not your dad, Chloe." With the exact same inflection she'd used on me dozens of times. And the look on her face was worth every uncomfortable second that followed. She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again like a fish gasping for air, and finally just turned around and walked out with the broken drawer still in her hands, slamming the office door hard enough that I heard Ethan ask from the living room if everything was okay. That became my new default response to everything. A polite declination, followed by her own words thrown back at her. And watching her try to process this role reversal was almost funny, except it was also deeply sad. Chloe had spent so long treating me like a combination of ATM, handyman, and personal assistant that she genuinely seemed confused when I stopped playing along. Like she couldn't compute that actions have consequences and relationships require actual reciprocity. The house started falling apart in small ways, not catastrophically, but enough to be noticeable. Things I would have normally handled before they became problems just sat there, getting worse. The garage door opener died and stayed dead for 2 weeks because Chloe kept saying she'd call someone, but never did. So, she had to manually open it every time she needed to leave, which was maybe twice a week because she rarely went anywhere. One of the kitchen cabinet doors came completely off its hinges and just leaned against the wall for days while Chloe stepped around it, occasionally commenting to me that it was dangerous and someone should really do something about it. The lawn grew wild because the mower ran out of gas, and apparently filling it was beyond Chloe's capabilities, even though I'd shown her how to do it 3 separate times, and it literally involved unscrewing a cap and pouring. I kept the kids fed and clean and happy, kept my own work and responsibilities handled. But everything that fell into the category of household maintenance that Chloe should have been contributing to just didn't get done. And I watched with morbid curiosity to see how long it would take her to either step up or completely melt down. What I didn't expect was the financial weirdness that started showing up when I actually sat down and looked at our bank statements instead of just glancing at the balances. We had a joint checking account that my paychecks went into, and I'd always trusted Chloe to be reasonable about spending since she wasn't working and we'd agreed on a budget. But when I pulled 3 months of statements, I found hundreds of small transfers to her personal account that I'd never noticed before. $50 here, $80 there, sometimes $120. Never enough to trigger alarm bells, but adding up to almost $2,000 over the quarter. And every single transfer had vague descriptions like personal expenses or miscellaneous that told me exactly nothing. I started documenting everything, not because I was planning anything specific yet, but because some instinct told me I needed a paper trail of what our actual life looked like. I took photos of the house in its natural state, the mess that accumulated when I wasn't constantly cleaning, the evidence that Chloe wasn't doing the childcare she claimed was so exhausting. I screenshot financial records, saved text message conversations where she'd refused to help with basic tasks, kept a log of who was actually parenting our kids versus who was just existing in the same building as them. My brother, Daniel, came over one afternoon to help me install a new water heater because the old one had died, and I wasn't about to let my kids take cold showers just to prove a point. He took one look around the house and asked me point blank if everything was okay in my marriage. I gestured at the general chaos and asked him if it looked okay. He just shook his head and told me something that stuck with me, which was that I didn't have to live like this. I knew, of course, I knew. But knowing and doing are 2 very different things when you've got 2 kids and a decade of history and some stupid hope that maybe things could still turn around. That hope died completely the day I came home early from work because a client meeting got cancelled. I walked in to hear Chloe on the phone in our bedroom with her door not quite closed all the way. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop. I was literally just standing in the hallway about to announce I was home when I heard her say, "No, I'm done. I've been done for months. I just need to figure out the cleanest way to exit." In a tone that was way too casual for the bomb she just dropped. My heart literally stopped, just completely froze in my chest. And I stood there like an idiot, listening to her continue, telling whoever was on the other end that I'd be blindsided, but that wasn't her problem. And that she'd been talking to her life coach about how to handle the whole situation without looking like the bad guy. Ice water in my veins. That's what it felt like. Pure ice water replacing my blood. As I realized my wife wasn't just checked out, she was actively planning her escape and treating our marriage like a PR campaign she needed to manage. I backed up quietly, went back outside, sat in my car in the driveway for 20 minutes trying to process what I just heard, and then pulled up my phone and searched for divorce attorneys in our area. I called the first one with good reviews, a woman named Jennifer, who had a calm, no-nonsense voice, and I laid out the basics of my situation in the parking lot of my own house because I couldn't risk Chloe overhearing. Jennifer listened to everything. The weaponized incompetence, the financial shoddiness, the overheard conversation. And then she said something that changed everything. "If you think she's planning something, you need to act like she's already executed it." And those words hit me like a freight train because she was absolutely right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Just lay there next to Chloe in our bed, watching her breathe peacefully like she wasn't actively plotting to blow up our kids' lives. And I made my decision. She thought she was going to control this narrative. Thought she was going to exit on her terms and paint me as the villain who didn't appreciate her. But I'd been documenting everything, and I had the truth on my side. And if she wanted a clean exit, she was about to find out that clean doesn't mean easy. I spent the next 2 weeks moving in complete silence, meeting with Jennifer 3 more times to go over strategy and documentation. She walked me through every single step like we were planning a military operation, which I guess in a way we were. She told me to keep acting normal. Don't change my routine. Don't give Chloe any indication that I knew what she was planning. And definitely don't confront her because that would just give her time to prepare her own counterattack. So, I played the role of oblivious husband for 14 days, making dinner and doing bedtime routines and pretending I didn't know my wife was planning to ambush me with some carefully crafted exit speech. And honestly, it was one of the hardest things I've ever done because every time she looked at me, I wanted to scream that I knew everything. Jennifer advised me to open a separate bank account and be ready to move money the moment I filed. Not before, because any premature transfers could look bad in court. So, I had everything set up and waiting like a loaded gun. Then Chloe made her move, and the timing was almost funny because she clearly thought she was being strategic about it. It was a Friday evening. The kids were at her parents' house for a sleepover that she'd arranged earlier in the week. And looking back, I should have known something was up because Chloe never voluntarily dealt with coordinating kid logistics. She'd made this whole production of cooking dinner for just the 2 of us, which should have been my first red flag because Chloe hadn't cooked anything more complicated than toast in about 18 months. We sat down at the table with her mediocre pasta, and she had this weird calm expression on her face, like she'd rehearsed this moment 100 times in the mirror. And then she just came out with it. She told me very matter-of-factly that she wasn't happy. Hadn't been happy for a long time, and she thought it would be best for everyone if we separated and eventually divorced. All delivered in this cold, corporate tone, like she was firing an underperforming employee. I watched her face as she spoke, looking for any sign of emotion or regret or even basic human feeling. And there was nothing there except maybe relief that she was finally saying the words out loud. She kept talking, saying things about how we'd grown apart and wanted different things and how this didn't have to be ugly if we could just be adults about it. And I realized she was expecting me to fight back, to beg her to reconsider, to give her the dramatic scene she probably fantasized about where she got to be the reasonable one. Instead, I just nodded slowly, took a sip of water, and said, "Okay, if that's what you want." In the most neutral voice I could manage. And I swear the confusion that flashed across her face was priceless. She actually stammered, clearly thrown off by my lack of resistance, and asked if I understood what she was saying, like maybe I was too stupid to grasp that my marriage was ending. I told her very calmly that I understood perfectly. That if she wanted a divorce, then we'd get a divorce, and that I hoped we could handle it maturely for the kids' sake. Basically giving her exactly what she claimed to want while watching her try to process why this wasn't going according to her script. She recovered quickly though, that cold mask sliding back into place. And she started talking about logistics and how we divide things and how she'd probably keep the house since she was the primary caregiver. And I just kept nodding and agreeing in principle while thinking about the process server who'd be knocking on our door in approximately 12 hours and the bank transfers I'd be executing at dawn. I slept on the couch that night, not because she asked me to, but because I couldn't stand being in the same bed with her. And I lay there in the dark, listening to her move around upstairs and wondering if she was texting her life coach about how smoothly her big announcement had gone. Saturday morning came early for me. I was up at 6 a.m. and by 6:30, I'd executed the bank transfers Jennifer had prepared, moving exactly half of our joint savings into my new account. And then I made coffee and waited. At exactly 9 a.m., there was a knock on the door. Chloe was still upstairs sleeping in, because why would today be any different? I answered it and took the envelope from the process server while she was still in her bathrobe. I went to the bottom of the staircase and called up that she had a visitor, my voice steady and calm like I was announcing a package delivery. And she came down looking annoyed and disheveled, probably thinking it was a neighbor or someone selling something. The process server handed her the papers and explained very professionally that she was being served with divorce proceedings. And I watched her face cycle through emotions so fast, it was almost comical. Confusion melting into shock, melting into something that looked almost like betrayal before finally landing on pure fury. She started to say something to the process server, her voice rising, but he just gave a polite nod and walked back to his car because his job was done and he'd clearly dealt with worse. Chloe spun around to face me, holding the papers in her shaking hands. And the look she gave me was something I'd never seen before, like she couldn't quite believe I was real. She demanded to know what I'd done. Her voice tight and controlled in that way that meant she was absolutely losing it internally. And I explained very calmly that I'd filed for divorce, just like she wanted. I just handled it first to make sure everything was processed fairly and legally. She started yelling then, really yelling about how I'd ambushed her and how this wasn't how it was supposed to happen and how dare I do this without warning her first. And the irony was so thick I almost laughed because apparently warning your spouse was only required when the request came from her side. I let her yell herself out while I sipped my coffee. Just standing there, watching this person I'd spent a decade with completely fall apart over losing control of something she'd literally asked for less than 12 hours ago. Then I suggested very calmly that she should probably read through the documents, especially pages 3 through 7, because there was a lot of important information in there. That's when she actually sat down and started reading, and I watched her face go from red with anger to white as paper as she got to the section about asset protection and the temporary financial orders and the custody filing. She looked up at me with these wide eyes and asked in this small voice if I'd really frozen the accounts. And I explained that I'd secured our assets exactly as my attorney had advised. And yes, I'd filed for primary custody of Ethan and Lily because the documentation clearly showed who'd been doing the actual parenting for the past 2 years. She kept reading, getting paler with each page. And when she got to the exhibit section with all my photos and bank records and text message screenshots, something in her just broke. She started crying. These big, gasping sobs, but they weren't sad tears. They were angry tears, frustrated tears, the tears of someone who'd just realized they'd been playing checkers while I was playing chess. The next few weeks were absolutely brutal. Not because the legal process was complicated, but because Chloe completely lost her mind when she realized she couldn't control the story anymore. Her parents called me within 24 hours. Her mom screaming about how I was destroying their daughter, and how could I be so cruel. And I very calmly told them I'd be happy to send over the documentation if they wanted to see what their daughter had actually been doing for the past 2 years. They went silent after that. No more calls, no more accusations, just radio silence that told me everything I needed to know about what they'd seen in those files. Her friends started backing away, too. The ones who'd been all supportive of her whole "my husband doesn't appreciate me" narrative suddenly got real quiet when they saw actual evidence of who was doing what in our marriage. Chloe tried coming back to the house multiple times during the separation period, always using the kids as an excuse, but really just wanting to talk about how we were throwing away 10 years over nothing, and how maybe we'd both overreacted and wasn't there some way to fix this. I told her the same thing every single time, that the marriage was over, that I'd given her years to be a partner, and she'd chosen not to be, and that I wasn't interested in fixing something she'd already decided to destroy. She just hadn't expected me to light the match first. The divorce finalized after 4 months, faster than I'd expected because Chloe eventually realized that fighting me wasn't going to get her anywhere when I had documentation for everything. I got primary custody with her getting the kids every other weekend. She kept her car and her personal savings, and we split the house equity 50-50, which meant selling it and both of us moving into smaller places. Ethan and Lily adjusted better than I'd feared. Kids are resilient like that. And having a stable routine with one parent who was actually present turned out to be way better than living in a house with 2 parents where only one gave a damn. I'm not going to pretend everything is perfect now, or that I don't have moments where I wonder if I could have done something different earlier. But mostly, I just feel this overwhelming sense of relief, like I've been carrying a weight that was crushing me and someone finally let me put it down. Chloe's living her own life now, doing whatever it is she does with her life coach and her yoga classes and her personal journey or whatever she's calling it these days. And honestly, I don't think about her much except when she's late picking up the kids or forgets to send back Lily's inhaler. The thing that keeps running through my head, the one thought that sums up this whole mess better than anything else I could say, is pretty simple. I didn't quit the marriage. I just finally woke up and realized I'd been in it alone for years. And the only person who was surprised when I stopped carrying both of us was the one who'd forgotten how to walk on her own. Do you think I handled this the right way, or was there another path?